Great, thank you.
Happy to.
All right, recording is on.
Ooh, it's official now.
Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming this evening. And so we'll start out by going over the agenda. Scott will not be with us tonight, so I will take care of his duties of public comments. So we were going to have a little presentation for one of our former commissioners tonight. Thank you, Edward, for coming back. Then we'll do our public comments and commissioner comments, review and approve the minutes. We'll talk about the public safety camera system, review of the policy, the chief's report. We'll talk about the restorative arrest policy this evening and the taser policy. And then the community outreach we may skip unless other people have, since Scott's not here tonight. And then closing comments. Anybody have any changes or adjustments to the agenda they would like to recommend? Okay. With that, we'll move over and ask Edward to step up. Edward, we just wanted to take an opportunity to thank you for all your service on the commission over the years, and we really appreciate all your input, everything that you did, and being the liaison from the Human Rights Commission is an important piece for here, so we thank you so much.
And it's my honor, even though I'm really kind of sad that we didn't get to have more connectivity here, but I'll look forward to working closely with Joel, and I'll get to see you at the, will you still be at the HRC a little bit or not? Okay, so I'll see you. So you know how to get a hold of me?
Yeah.
Okay, good enough.
911, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I have to say, now remember, there's not an 11 on the phone, so it's 911. But just a certificate of appreciation, which is nice, but maybe even more important is offering what we often give both the military service and civilian law enforcement is what we call our challenge coin. And they're kind of just, it's a token of our appreciation, and just the history behind that is challenge coins are deeply embedded in military history where you always carry it with you, and if you get challenged and you don't have it with you, oftentimes you have to buy the beverage of choice. So that is what we're doing. So let's take a picture. So.
Yay.
1, 2, 3. Perfect.
So thank you so much for everything you've done. I really appreciate it. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Edward.
Yeah. It was a pleasure serving with all of you. Thank you. Good luck.
Very cool.
Thanks, Edward.
Thanks, Edward.
Edward, you should ask Bill if he has his before you leave.
Do you have your challenge?
Oh!
So if I lose, does that mean I have to?
No. It just means you're good to go. If he didn't have it on him, he owed you. So just be careful next time he sees you.
I got mine for completing the Citizens Police Academy.
Oh, yeah. So
Many years ago when we had
You
one.
had that on demand, you had a hand.
thanks, everyone.
He thought it might come in
Yeah,
handy
you'll see
tonight,
Billy.
eh?
Make sure that you challenge him every time you see him.
Heard about this. Come prepared.
Are those that get out of jail
Boy
free?
Scout.
So we'll move on to public comments. That looks like we have one public comment from Jessica C. Screen. Jessica, come up to the front of the table. We'll give you 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 20 seconds remaining.
Okay. Hello, I just wanted to say something about bicycle theft and community feeling that the police department isn't doing enough about that. I know it's a huge and challenging issue, and I don't really know what is going on. I saw on Facebook that the, what are they called? Decoys? What are they called?
Bait bike.
Bait bike.
Bait bikes were used recently. I would like to find out what exactly the police department is trying to do about the bike theft problem, not necessarily tonight. A close friend just had his bike stolen, and I notice on Facebook pages that I hear about it most often in the Whitaker area, but apparently it's happening all over the place. In the Amazon neighborhood, apparently they think some thefts are because thieves are using drones from Amazon Park, checking out people's backyards, and going and stealing stuff, not just bikes, but others. My friend's bike was stolen from a backyard in Amazon neighborhood. So, And there's the whole chop shop issue, and, you know, I know it's very complicated. I know a lot of the folks who are particularly disturbed over and over and over when their bikes get stolen, especially in Whitaker, just aren't inclined to come here and talk to the police commissioner, police department about it, so I just thought I'd put in the word on their behalf. And I'm a person who'd like to get a bike for my old age, maybe a tricycle, but those are so expensive, and I just imagine, what if it's stolen as soon as I get it? You know, it just discourages me from going to bike. So thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, since there isn't any other public comment, we'll move on to commissioner's comment. And Will, can we start with you? And
Sure.
Clockwise around too?
I continue to be perplexed and distressed by how many drivers in Eugene are continuing to use cell phones while they drive. Had an interesting experience yesterday. I was at 29th and Willamette, and there was a car next to me, a RAV4 with a woman driving, and she was, you know, I watched her texting. And I got behind her, followed her up south, up the hill. And the first 3 or 4 blocks, it was okay. She was weaving inside the lane a fair bit, but still inside the lane. But after we passed the post office going up that hill, she drifted across the center line with about half her car. And it was pretty exciting for the people coming down the hill to watch, you know, they exhibited excitement behavior. And then she caught herself and pulled back, but she overcorrected. And I thought she was going up on the sidewalk. She did go clear through the whole bike lane and hit the curb with her wheels. And so it was pretty exciting to watch her. But she turned off at, I think, 37th. So I didn't get to see her anymore. And I thought this might provide a good occasion for calling for maybe more public awareness of the new law, more, you know, that sort of thing. I thought there might be a chance to put an article in paper or something like that. And then I read this letter from the editor, not from the editor, but from a Eugene citizen, which I thought was this morning's paper. It says, everyone's probably aware of the new penalty for cell phone use while driving, which establish exorbitant fines and even the possibility of jail time. I and many others find this new law to be unjust, excessively punitive, government overreach, and discriminatory. We plan to ignore this law.
Oh my goodness.
And then he goes on, fantasizing about losing his kids and his house and everything if he gets pulled over too many times for this law. It gets kind of silly after. Well, it's already silly, but so it kind of opens my eyes to the fact that not everybody agrees with my perception that these new laws are excellent and that we need them and that we should all quit using our cell phones, you know, while driving. But I hope this guy's a real outlier, but it's Eugene after all. So no, that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I am very glad to be here, but I don't have any specific comments.
Okay, good.
I'll just share the Civilian Review Board will be seating 2 new members, and we're going to be off for this month and next. Our next meeting will be in September.
My comment goes to the safety cameras, which we'll talk about soon. In general, from the folks I've talked to, they seem generally supportive of it, provided there's proper signage. Talked to a few neighborhood associations and some stuff like that. So my Facebook microcosm as well, but yeah.
Thank you. Joel?
I wanted to first echo the comments during public comment. I've lived in the Whitaker my whole life and have had probably 3 bikes stolen, the last 2 in the last 5 years or so. So it's certainly a problem, and I know responsiveness can be somewhat of an issue. But there's a reason why we're one of the most stolen, bike communities in the U.S., and we're not going to solve it overnight. But certainly something that would be, I think the Human Rights Commission, I would certainly be interested in figuring out how we can help EPD be more responsive to those issues. The second thing I wanted to mention was that IP22 has received 110,000 signatures. That was on July 6th. They have 1 more week of verification, you need a total of 88,000 to qualify. There have been several sheriffs throughout the state that have come out publicly in opposition of IP 22. Just as a reminder, that's the initiative petition that would rescind Oregon's 30-year-old sanctuary law limiting interaction between police departments and immigration enforcement. So perhaps this is a conversation for today, perhaps another time, but we've yet to see any police chiefs come out in opposition. I know there's some complications with the mayor and city council, but I think it's certainly a conversation that we can have here as to, is this something the police commission can oppose to help that cause out? So, thank you.
Well, I wasn't going to make comment until Joel made his. I believe our new police chief actually served with Chief Leonard. Am I getting the name correct? In Benton County?
Well, I guess it depends
Back
on
in the 90s?
Chief Leonard.
In the 80s. I might have the name wrong. Who was one of the champions of the sanctuary state law, who worked with the ACLU of Oregon.
Oh, Ron Louie.
Louie,
he
thank
was
you.
my chief in Hillsborough,
There you
hired
go.
me.
And
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, is going to help me with a selection of a deputy chief position. That's how profoundly confident I am in his leadership.
So I don't want to put the chief on the spot, but we do have, excellent leadership in this state, and I'm encouraged that there are sheriffs coming out in opposition to IP 22, and hopefully maybe our local sheriff will be amongst them as well.
Yes.
We have I'm sorry, this may not be the time to say this, but we have the joint OACP and OSSA meeting in September in Salem. It's coming up, and I'm happy to carry our pail of water at that meeting, whatever that looks like, Joel. So maybe you and I get together and talk about how I can help us in that venue.
So I apologize for my absence. Last month, my son was graduating from middle school.
Congratulations.
Yeah, exciting. But glad to be here. It's hot. So
I know.
Yeah.
Wearing the t-shirt. Sorry. It's way too hot.
I apologize.
It's at least cool in this room.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's, I said earlier, but it's a little hit or miss throughout the building. So
Really?
the Chiefs and I's offices were close to 79 today,
Yeah. Ooh.
78.8 or so. The next door is 73. Who knows? HVAC guy's coming back in the morning. He was apologizing profusely. I told him it didn't really matter. It's been that way for 2.5 years now. So what's another day? I appreciate everybody being patient with me last month and letting me babble over the phone about drone stuff. Ironically, 2 days later, a day or two later, we got called out to map out the crash scene on MLK Boulevard. The old ex-football player who got ejected from the car. And then the last today and then 2 weeks ago for the officer-involved shootings, Eugene and the county. So we got called out to map and photograph both of those scenes also. So we're getting use. Unfortunate the circumstances that it's being used in, but coming along. And I'm excited about talking about our policies tonight. So hopefully we'll be able to get through all three of them.
Thank you. Want to welcome everybody. And I will say, Joel, we had this discussion about the sanctuary city, and the commission and the chief at the time came out very strongly how we treat that. And so we'd be happy to look at having another discussion on that too in the future, if that what you feel is necessary. So I went on a ride-along 2 weeks ago on a graveyard shift. And it was with an officer that had a lot of awards at the award ceremony, and so it was a lot of fun to see the energy that even on a graveyard shift that the officers have to get out there and do their job. So it was fun. I recommend everybody to do that. I know Jeremy and I are trying to figure out maybe some officers that would volunteer to take us from time to time, so that you would have somebody that you can always email and do that. And so he's trying to put together a list of that. So, because I'd like to have more of the commissions get out there, and it also helps. A lot of the officers don't know what we do, and they like to ask questions and find out what the commission does. And so I think it's just good, and also good for us as we're looking at policies to be out there and see what they go through. So, good. Thank you. Chief.
I think I'll save most of my comments for my report.
Okay.
That's okay, Bill.
That would be great. Okay, so we'll move to review and approve the minutes. Anybody have any comments, corrections, questions? If not, I will look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second by Sean. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, thank you. With that, we will move on to the public safety camera pilot review. And I will make one comment. I do really like Jeremy's little memo about what we're doing for each policy and putting that in there. That was a very nice addition. Tell them that when I see them.
Sounds good.
I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right. So this has come back again. This is one it's funny. It's kind of yo-yoed over the last few years. So we're back to looking at it. Only it was really written previously specifically for downtown cameras, stationary hard-mounted downtown cameras, and so it wound up being a two-part document, the appendix and then the actual policy. What we found now is that the appendix really is, it's outdated, it's very specific to the downtown initiative. And so our proposal is that we're likely to just remove the appendix completely and round file it for now. Obviously, we'll be able to refer back to it if it's necessary at some point. And then really looked at this policy, the public safety camera system, as a much more generic police cameras in general. Fortunately, it was pretty well written that way to begin with, the actual policy itself. So there really were only a handful of minor changes. The lieutenant who's working on the camera trailer project is the one that suggested the edits that are on here. I made a few tweaks here and there. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. Previously, it had said that they would not record sound. That's something that, with the way the trailers are now, that's something that we want to have as a potential option. Again, being able to hear what's happening and not just being silence certainly makes a difference in your ability to track down, prosecute, to be able to understand what you're even looking at. Are there any thoughts from anyone about?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So are you going to be able to like turn it on and off the sound, or will it be either always on or always off?
That is a fantastic question, and I have no idea.
Okay.
Once we have more information about the trailers or about what that system is gonna actually look like, it would probably be worth having a time slot at a future meeting for Lieutenant Mozan to come in and actually talk about the equipment. Actually, the chief knows quite a bit about it.
Yeah, so I think our intent is not necessarily to capture conversation, because there's certain acknowledgments that need to be made for being able to do that. But there is technology that leverages audible sounds to help us identify through analytics where certain activity is occurring.
Like breaking
specifically
glass,
like
or-
breaking glass, gunshots is a big one. So cities that are plagued with lots of gun violence have programs called Shot Spotter that through the audible sound of the gunshots, they're able to identify and pinpoint where the gunshots are coming from, which through analytics helps put officers in the right spot at the right times. So I think that it would be a little bit short-sighted to to not have at least the opportunity to leverage technology that becomes available that would help us with breaking glass, gunfire, those types of things. There's actually cities that are doing this with fireworks. As much as we did it with app-based, they're doing it with fireworks, where they're able to put cameras up in different locations with the audible sounds, and actually they're able to map where the fireworks are coming from, those types of things. And so, but the intent is not necessarily to capture discussion, because I do think that I think that's a little bit overreaching for what my vision was for what we wanted to do with these cameras, is to not necessarily capture people's private conversations as opposed to their non-private behaviors in public space. So.
Could one of you describe the trailers a little bit more? Because I'm
Sure. So there's many different configurations, and we are finishing up the proposal for what we want to go to. So in general, they all kind of look the same. So essentially, it's a trailer that can be about the size of, quite honestly, about these two tables together. Is about the size. They house electronics and a battery. In some cases, a diesel-generated backup system, and on the top of and it's a single-axle, two-wheel trailer that has a towing capability, and in the middle is a telescoping mast that goes up to as high as 30 or 35 feet, with a camera head on the top that has pan, tilt, and zoom capabilities. And the trailer's big enough with sides that the intent is to get them whatever color we choose, probably white would be my guess, maybe blue, and brand them with EPD brand all over it, so that's a very, very visible, very overt display of some type of police presence in areas that we see as needing that presence. And so, much like you've seen and maybe in other communities, and we actually are purchasing a couple of these ourselves, the radar carts where you see them on the side of the road, they show you your speed, and it's a little cart that you tow, and it's self-contained, and on the side it usually says Eugene Police Department or Department of Transportation. It's very similar to that, very similar to that. So there's some real advantages to the kind of the branding of this, and you know, announcing what it is. We're not trying to sneak up on anybody or trying to be covert in this at all. So.
So anything on the first page now that we're having a second look at this, or third or fourth look at this point?
Is it going to be a pilot program, or is this a permanent policy that will be in to look at having cameras? Since we're buying, does it look like we're buying the system?
Well, we are buying the system, but I also made a commitment to council that I wanted to approach us as being able to go down the path and be able to evaluate this after a year's worth of deployment, and see if there's any unintended consequences that we don't see. So you're kind of all in. We were hoping to identify a potential lease option in the event that we have a lease option where we can get things here quicker, because what happens is you order these and they build them for you and they can take months. We may enter into, if available, into a lease opportunity, which gets equipment here quicker, which then allows us to do some of the things that we're trying to do downtown and throughout the community. So the question is, and I'm not quite sure whether it's going to be a lease on the front end and a purchase on the back end, or just a purchase. We're still working on that.
How many of these are you talking about?
Depends on the price. I want to be a good steward of the money, because there's other things I want to do with the money that council and the budget committee have afforded us to spend in this fiscal year 19. Fiscal year, I guess, 19, right? Fiscal year 19, 18, 19. But you can spend anywhere from $30,000 to $85,000 depending on the capabilities. So we're trying to temper our request, because it doesn't do me any good to have one when we have multiple needs. So I'm trying to get a small, small fleet, 3 or 4, so that I can use them if we need to use them downtown, we can do that. If we have some parks that are struggling, we can do that. If we have a special event that is asking for extra security at their event, we would be able to meet those needs. There are some neighborhood block parties that are going on that have already requested maybe a presence of the camera to keep an eye on their safety and security while they enjoy themselves on their block parties and those types of things. So I think there's some application all over.
So we go to page 2, camera system monitoring. It was requested to remove, it's fairly restrictive. The language that's in the current policy is fairly restrictive on when the cameras can be looked at. And with it being specific to downtown and kind of on a little bit of a different mission, the language stated, when there's an in-progress call in the vicinity of one of the camera locations, an on-duty watch commander may authorize Eugene Police Department sworn personnel or communications specialists to selectively view the appropriate camera and relay any available information to responding units. And we would rather just remove that and allow us to view them, utilize them at will as necessary, and leave ourselves a little bit more flexible. Then we added the downtown public safety station or mobile device used by EPD employees. So just tweaking that the technology now allows, like we will allow for people to log in on phones or computers in the cars or whatever to be able to view the camera. Any thoughts or concerns about that?
So if I remember, and the commissioners that were around back when we first did this policy, I think that language was in there because there was a concern that somebody in the department could just go in and start watching the cameras or start doing that for no reason. And I'm not sure what how valid of a concern it was, but I think that was sort of the concern with that. Because Claire, you were here when we did. Was that?
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
A little bit, not the specific language. So I don't know if it was the same concern. I recall the concern I think I raised was from a story, I can't remember the genesis of it, about a similar, about security cameras like this then being misused by the employees to, zoom in on a woman's cleavage and follow her across the plaza and that kind of,
Sure.
harassing activity, which of course the person wouldn't know was happening. But so I don't know if this language was trying to get at that, but that was kind of the issue, like legitimate use only. So I think maybe trying to hone in on who has need to legitimately access the equipment and then the recording.
And I speculated that it was probably along those lines, essentially that at least at that time, and the commission at the time is concerned about all of that, both of those concerns. That we go to a static state where we're now just staffing the cameras constantly and we've got constant
there's that
video
too.
monitoring.
Right.
Not that we would have the staff to be able to do that. But there's always that concern. We do have, under prohibited activity, there's a pretty strong statement about how it's going to be used, and that that all monitoring will be conducted in a professional, ethical, and legal manner, and that covers us if we do find that we have an employee that's violating or conducting themselves in that way, that we have teeth to be able to take action against the employee for the policy.
So the language that I see here doesn't cause me any concern. I think it's good.
I think anecdotally, and of course we don't have the experience to speak to this, but if you think about what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to be a force multiplier in the sense that officers are going to be able to be in one location and be able to do some check-ins with others. There'll be multiple people that'll be reviewing these cameras at once potentially. So you could have as many as 6 or 7 officers or professional staff that has the monitor up. And in the event that an officer decided to misuse the camera, likely that will be revealed to a variety of people that I would like to believe in the culture of this police department would raise the red flag. So it's not one of those things that's kind of invisible where you're You're sitting in a room with your closed circuit TV, you're the only one monitoring it, and you get to misuse it. It actually is. And we've talked about whether or not downstream past the pilot, if where the cameras are up end up being an opportunity for some kind of like a webcam presence that's more public facing. So people could log in and see what's going on downtown, wherever the cameras are, those types of things. So I think there's some things that are built into this that have a tendency to dissuade some of that. Some of the
Yeah, well,
concerns on
I
that,
think
so.
that's would be very interesting. I do think the story that I had read involved 2 officers, it might have been federal police actually,
Yeah.
who were misbehaving together.
Yeah.
Is there a happy medium between this language and what you all want to do?
Well, I think I'm comfortable with this language. So, I mean, unless there's somebody that's not comfortable with this language, I think this puts us in a position where I feel like with anything that we do in law enforcement, there's a certain amount of trust that we try to extend to our law enforcement professionals with the assumption that they're going to act appropriately until they choose not to. And then, unfortunately, that's why our policy manuals are this thick instead of this thick, right? I'm happy to entertain whatever that looks like, but this language, I think, gives us the operational ability to do what we need to do.
Is there a record of who's looking at them at any given time? I know with like Google Docs up in the right-hand corner, it says, you and 2 other people are looking at this right now.
There generally is an audit trail of who logs in when, much like with our in-car video. Is the same way. We know who's logged in and watched in-car video and body-worn camera. So this would most likely have a component that has a nice audit trail so that we could identify if we went in and did, for instance, a spot audit like we do in a lot of different areas and saw a pan, tilt, and/or zoom, to your point, in a direction that we felt like was questionable, we'd be able to identify who had logged in at that point.
In that same note, a little bit lower is the 30 days of saved material. Is there any additional cost to keeping it around for a little bit longer? And how much?
We're working on storage solutions now, whether on-premise or cloud solution for storage. I like the cloud solution because it allows us to expand and contract as needed. The 30 days is the state minimum retention standard. And we would keep things longer if it had an evidentiary value and store that in the cloud. If I have my way, we'd store it in the cloud. The Microsoft, probably the government cloud that is CJIS compliant. So the answer is yes, there's a cost depending on how much storage we need. I think there is any public records official would tell you, unless there's a real articulable reason to not save things that don't need to be saved. When it comes to when you're able to purge public records, it's time to purge public records. That's why they have a retention value. But the things that become evidence for us, we would save until adjudication. And the DA's office gave us the ability to say we're done. But the 30 days, that's how we landed on 30 days is the minimum retention schedule for video.
And is that the same schedule for the like taser camera video and the in-car video and the body-worn cameras?
I don't know the answer to that.
Those have, because there's a bunch of different categories, and we actually don't have any taser cams. But the in-car video and the body cameras have probably 15 or 20 different types of incidents that they can be classified as, and each one of those has a different retention schedule depending on what the need is.
So we grabbed the largest one and keep it for the longest one, I'm sure is what we did. So,
yeah, and the data retention really is a long-term is a problem. It's we have a lot of video.
Yeah.
With the amount of officers that we have, the body cams, the in-car videos, and so our data storage is an issue and a pretty significant cost when you total everything up together. So, yeah.
I have Stephen and Joel.
So just to follow up on an earlier question, not wanting to be operational or anything, but it's about the folks that log in and you can track who's logging in. Is there some expectation to have like a random sampling just to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, and we do that in, for instance, that's often common in like the dispatch world with interactions between dispatchers and the public on 911s. There's oftentimes a random audit of grabbing a sampling of interactions just to make sure that we're doing what we say we should.
Yeah,
be
so
doing.
there's your check.
We can build that mechanism in. I don't think it speaks to it specifically in the policy, but having I wouldn't be opposed to on a case-by-case basis or periodically doing a random sampling of the types of video that we're seeing, and seeing if there's anything that is a early warning for us or red flag for us. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see. Oh, but I'm just talking out of turn. You want to put me down next? I'm sorry.
It's okay if you answered Steve's question.
Yeah, it's specific. It would be interesting to see if the software will allow or will log who logs in and what they were viewing. And I don't know that I've seen very many viewers that give you that specificity, especially with a camera that's just running long term. So I think part of your question will be answered as we move forward and we see what the actual interface looks like and what they're logging. To be able to pull meaningful data, to be able to target kind of what we're looking at. If there's a way to be able to look at what people specifically were controlling and when somebody was specifically utilizing the camera, that would be an interesting functionality to know about.
Yeah.
And would certainly assist in making a meaningful audit.
I think something like that would alleviate some concerns that might be out there.
But the good news is we're in the decision-making ability to, and looking at the technical specifics of what we want to purchase, that can be a piece of what we score as they try and present themselves, present a case to us on what we want, is we want a very robust accountability mechanism to that, so.
Joel and
Thanks.
Silver.
Do we manage all the media in-house, or do we use an external entity currently?
We have a combination of both.
Would the plan be that would be continuation if we were to implement this, that we would have a mix of external entity, cloud data management, and internal as well?
Well, I think that's what we're still trying to figure out. I think that's part of the decision-making process.
We're in an interesting time where we still have some legacy beliefs on the advantages of on-premise and some new beliefs on wanting to shift things to the cloud. So we're right in maybe all of us are feeling that.
Sure.
But I think we're in this interesting dialogue right now about what's more what's cost prohibitive, or maybe what's more cost efficient, I should say. And then what gives us, I personally have asked to look at a cloud solution. If it was up to me, I would let Microsoft do all the maintenance and the upgrades and have it be seamless to us, and I would be able to spend money and expand and contract my storage needs on a moment's notice. So that's kind of been my marching orders for them, is to look at a cloud-based solution. We're working with City ISD, who has kind of a mix between on-prem advocates and cloud advocates, so we're still in dialogue around that.
Fun.
Anything else, Joel?
Thank you.
Silver.
Yeah. In the 80s, we had a TV show called ALF, A-L-F, Alien Life Form. And I remember I enjoyed it as a kid. It was a, fuzzy alien that ate cats and got into all kinds of mischief.
Remember ALF?
Yeah. And I remembered it fondly. And a few weeks ago, I found that it was available to stream on a website and pulled it up for my son, and it's just garbage. The show is no good. As were most of the shows that we grew up watching.
I often feel that same way about the beer that I drank when I was younger. So I know that feeling.
Right, the regrets. I don't think long-term solution is going to actually be a benefit. I think, if the language here is where it is, if it's in a process where it could be used for court records, then you can save it for up to 60 days and then be done with it. My concern has always been, having too much of this information, and I want to feel like I have the freedom to enjoy myself. I'm not, doing anything inappropriate, but I'd like to feel that I'm not being monitored all the time. I understand you're wanting to kind of feel like there's more of a presence and that we feel a little more secure, but I think at some point we start to use technology as a way to fill in for places where we're not able to do what we should be doing, where we should have more officers like, I believe her name is Julie Smith. Wonderful person. I see her
Does a
downtown
great
all the
job.
time. Great. Has a good rapport with a lot of people in the community. You don't get that from a camera. And so my concern is if we start to rely too much upon security cameras and the technology, what's next?
Yeah.
And that's always been my concern, and I've voiced this to Sergeant Williams before. I understand the point, but I know that we always tend towards, we can do this, and we start to do this, and what is it taking the place of? So that's just my concern.
No, I appreciate that.
Anything else on these sections?
Nothing replaces a good old-fashioned beat cop walking around talking to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
There's financial issues.
So we kind of skipped across the training, prohibited activity, notification of the public. We briefly touched on prohibited activity. Any thoughts or concerns about any of those sections? Looks like we already went through media storage. Retrieval of recorded information. Pretty restrictive for retrieving recorded. And then there were no other changes to the rest. So public and other agency requests.
Yeah, there needs to be a change there,
Okay.
because our city attorney is now a she.
Thank you.
Oh, is there a he in here?
It says to the city attorney or his designee.
Nice catch.
Claire.
I'm telling Catherine, you can't wait.
Many other places in the policy, it's got the his, her, or he, she, but
Yeah.
that one didn't get caught.
I'm still not even seeing it.
It's
Oh, here it
the
is.
second end of the second sentence, second line.
If you just go with like there, then.
Well, I've started doing that, but you know, it's funny. Not everybody agrees with the use of there in that way. So I actually Googled it once, and technically it's not correct. But in
grammatically.
recent memory, in recent times, is becoming more acceptable as a way. I think it sounds cleaner and reads easier than his
His, her,
slash her,
yeah.
whatever. So I've been plugging it into different places, but it's interesting because I've had people give me back drafts and be like, yeah, you know, you got to write it, you got to. Well, no, technically, technically maybe.
Whoever said that, they are wrong.
Use they, no.
It seems more inclusive.
I'm gonna put there in it.
Always
I'm gonna
use
just do it.
No, it doesn't.
Executive decision.
Right? There aren't very many decisions I get to make, but.
I thought you were just gonna blame it on the last policy writer.
Right? And then annual review of the camera system.
So I'd like to open the door for a publicly viewable option somewhere in this.
Good.
Because I think that's a great idea, and the people who are concerned about, you know, the police state and public surveillance, I feel will feel less spied upon if it's a community resource rather than a tool being used against them.
I would suggest that because this is a pilot program, and it's going to be, the policy is going to be kicked off as a pilot, and we don't know what the capabilities are and what kinds of infrastructure on the city side is going to be required, is that when this comes back to be officialized permanently,
Is that a word, officialized?
I just made it a word.
He's
In
making all sorts of
recent
grammar.
times, it's becoming more.
He does make
more
policy.
acceptable.
He does make
Will you
policy.
believe that one? That's a topic that is discussed or considered at that point. I'm trying to think about how I can make a note somewhere where it would get viewed later. Or maybe all the wonderful memories in here will pull it back out as we move on. I'll see if there's a way that I can, I don't know, try to make a note somewhere that that's an option. But I think we've certainly heard that that's an interest and something that we can talk about.
And I think it begs a little bit of a deeper discussion, because on a case-by-case basis, there may be some reasons to not make it
Right.
publicly viewed. If, for instance, you are
And the record maybe not publicly viewable, so if there's, a gruesome scene, not everybody can go back and look at it, but as a,
Just live viewable.
live viewable, yeah, like webcasting.
So, Joel, do you have?
Yeah, before I forget, remembered you mentioned we're still trying to figure out whether or not sound is going to be recorded. But just for more information, I'd love to get more information on the ShotSpotter technology. And I'm sure we're going to be included in those conversations in the future, but if you could send us just some basic information, on that technology.
That's a specific company that does it, because I've looked them up, and I would just Google it and send you the link. Or I would just encourage you to just Google it, ShotSpotter. And there's some cool articles on the internet about it from some of the agencies that are using it.
Oakland Police Department uses it.
Yeah, I read
Chicago,
a year and a half
Chicago
ago.
completely changed the trajectory of their violent crime with that kind of technology. We don't have an application for ShotSpotter here. I just brought it up as an example of audible technology that could be associated with this that down the road we might want to take.
It works by triangulation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they put up microphones in different areas all over, and then it triangulates.
The three strongest
and notifies the
responders.
police of the location that it triangulates it to at the time that it
Pretty cool.
happens.
But the connection with the audio and the video is because the city of Chicago's had to go to hard-mounted cameras on every single light pole, on every single corner, in front of every single business to try and get their arms around their violent crime. And so it's kind of a hand-in-glove type of thing, and this one is certainly not needed, as it's not as pervasive here, obviously. So.
I assume that the audio recording would be fairly sensitive, enough to pick up shattering glass, but not sensitive enough to pick up individual, private conversations.
Yeah, I don't know, because it would be specifically a third party, probably piece of software that would be work in conjunction with this. And so, again, my intent, at least in this, and I'm comfortable, especially in this pilot project period of time, to just not have audio as a part of it, and just say, let's just observe behavior, and forego the audio and see if it's meeting our needs. And if we need to go down the path of an enhancement to this, which may include audio, then we can have that conversation. But for me, I'm more convinced that the deterrence factor of having it here is the biggest advantage. And secondarily, the ability to capture criminal behavior, not having fun behavior, but criminal behavior, in an effort to effectively prosecute crime. We've seen significant positive impacts of having ICV and car video and body-worn cameras when it comes to our prosecution rates. We don't have to go to court. We don't have prosecutor time. When you have that kind of evidence, it really can be advantageous for us. And so that's a piece of this that we hope we never have to use, but in the event that we do, that we'll have it.
I personally don't have an issue with the audio the way you described that you would use it. And frankly, I think it can fill in context in a criminal proceeding, because a lot of times they say, well, what started it? And if you're missing that, you're making it up. So for me, I'm not overly concerned about the audio portion.
Yeah, it's interesting, because how many times have we been reactive to a call, and it's a he said, she said about who pushed who first, or who hit who first, or who was the primary aggressor. And in the event that it happens in the purview of one of the Guardian trailers, we're able to pull that, just like we would with ICV or body-worn camera, and be able to clearly articulate. And it helps us be more efficient in making sure that we're holding the right person accountable. And when we see that kind of some of the stuff that happens downtown that has a tendency to not be one-on-one, it has a tendency to be kind of this massive group, especially at night after 2 a.m. and everybody's intoxicated, it can really be an advantage for us to kind of sort out the details.
The only last comment I'll have is that, is this an 18-month pilot program or an annual pilot program? Because you're annually reviewing an 18-month long program.
Well, the policy is written more as a way of being able to scrub the pilot language. It will have an annual review. The pilot program, as it was discussed 3 years ago, was an 18 months. So that the 18 could be 12. You mentioned a 12-month pilot program. So the pilot program duration can be adjusted depending on how the program comes together. When it comes together, it may be that 12 months is plenty to be able to evaluate. It may be that if we're through this summer, by the time we actually have the equipment here, so we'd want to do 18 months to try to get 2 seasons of use out of it to be able to really evaluate it. So I think those are a touch flexible at this point still.
Well, I guess I asked this question because if you want us to maybe vote on that we're comfortable with this policy tonight, I think you need to have that decision.
How long the pilot program will run for?
Yes, because I think that's, yeah.
How about, can we put language in there that makes it a pilot program with a year starting from the date of deployment?
Yeah. We can just say 12-month pilot program.
And that gives us a year's worth of actual usage that we can analyze.
I honestly like 18-month because that way we'll have the same months the next year to see how it changed, rather than, I mean, you know, there's more crime in the summer.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking about that is, at the end of the 12-month, do you just have to stop and wait for approval of a policy? I mean, that seems like a shame. Maybe if you had 18 months, you'd have a little elbow room there after the 12 months while the equipment is still running and still being used, while you get a policy together.
Seems like maybe we keep it as an annual review.
Yes.
And then that's static moving forward. But maybe to appease what your concern is, that we add a line stating that at the end of the 18-month or whatever the duration, the decided duration, a final report will be presented to make final determination on a moving forward.
So, I mean, the policy that we're reviewing is a policy specifically for a pilot. And I'm fine with the 18-month time frame. And then, in terms of your consideration, I would assume that in advance of the pilot time period running out, the chief would have done some evaluation, the department would have looked, city council might have weighed in, and this policy could be in development. I mean, most of this policy, assuming it's working, would just be transferred to the permanent policy. So I don't think we need to be too concerned about the chief having to shut the cameras down. We all like it, it's great. No, you can't use it yet until this commission meets and goes through the policy. I mean, the chief does have the authority to create a policy and implement it without us. So.
That's right.
Well, it's more reason to do 18 months and have an annual review. And then
Correct.
there's 6 more months of pilot program
That's right.
to do the process and
to
allow things.
adjust anything that, in terms of operations, that needs to be adjusted. Yeah.
Are you saying we take a long time to?
Well, sometimes I'm not here, which makes things a little more difficult.
So I feel like these other commissioners really want some of the other items added to the pilot, and I feel like this policy is in a good place to be approved.
Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Get a second? Steve will second. Sean, let's see. Okay, any other discussion about the policy? No discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. It's approved. Perfect. Your hands down.
Good work.
And just as a clarification, so we are not including the appendix.
The appendix will be rescinded in its entirety from our policy manual, and it will become a historical document that can be reviewed if there's any portions that might provide assistance in moving along.
Okay. We were right on time. Good work.
Hey, look at that.
So let's go to the chief's report.
Excellent. So I would indulge the commission on helping me identify what information from me would be most useful for you. I know that maybe in the past there was a fairly lengthy report provided that had all sorts of analytics that were produced from various levels within the organization, and there was effort spun up to produce reports, analytics, maybe some charts and graphs from a variety of different areas in the organization. It's helpful for me to know if that was beneficial or not, because I certainly am trying to work on efficiencies, and I don't want to produce something that's not needed. Or if we are feeling comfortable with kind of going through kind of a more relational time with me in the report process, where I talk a little bit about what's going on with your police department and some direction we're doing and being able to answer some questions. So I would just ask the commission to contemplate what they feel like this time, how this time can be best utilized, because I want to meet your needs. And so maybe you think about that while I kind of give you a little bit of an update on what's going on. I do want to congratulate you for the work you just did. I think whether we have a tendency from time to time when we talk about the 21st century policing model that we focus a lot on the kind of the trust and confidence in community policing and the relationship we have with the community, but one of the pillars speaks specifically to social media and technology, and that there are pieces of that 21st century policing report that absolutely recognize the importance of a just and reliable 21st century policing organization to be up and leveraging technology the best we can. And so I think that's good work that this commission has just done to at least go down this path and see if this is a good fit for our community. So thank you for that. We are, if you've been paying attention, we are feverishly gathering data and trying to identify gaps in the public safety system and the community justice system, and trying to identify packages or levels, service levels that we want to try and accomplish. And we'll be having a good conversation with council next. I will not be here, but it'll be next Wednesday. The council will get their first peek at some initial polling that occurred. I've had a chance to look at that, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. But I think it's important information that we're gathering now about the public's awareness of whether or not there's an issue, or what the issue is that or what issues they perceive to be the most important. And so this first round of polling is going to be very informative and give us kind of a roadmap of where we need to go through the summer while council is on break, coming back in September 24th with some recommendations. And so I'm very excited about getting some of that work done. We've been talking about this. My understanding has been for a couple of years. And so we're starting to actually get some deliverables out of the way, and so I'm really pleased about that. Yesterday, I launched a recruitment for a deputy chief position here. An agency this size with this command structure is unusual to not have an assistant chief or a deputy chief that can come alongside the chief and help run operations while I look to be externally focused for the right reasons. And have a balance between internal and external. This police department has a tremendous need for a lot of internal focus right now. There's a lot of care and feeding, as you know, as we ask our men and women to continue to work harder and to get drafted into overtime situations and putting them at their wits' end, both at the dispatch center and on patrol mostly, which will be a nice segue into our next policy we talk about. They need a lot of care and feeding internally, and the right deputy chief that's in alignment with where we want to take this police department with this community, and the way we want to treat each other internally and the way we want to treat this community will be very important. And so I've engaged that, and that will be open for 30 days, and then we'll go through a thoughtful process about that, and I'll be involving some internal and external stakeholders in helping me make a good decision. But ultimately, that's my person. I get to choose my person, and it'll be my first chance to be able to build a command staff that's familiar to me. That's my person my first hire I get to have. Concurrently, we have a couple of sergeant and lieutenant positions that are open, so we're going through processes to promote those. So that'll also be a great opportunity for me to start putting the right people on the bus and the right seats on the bus, if you're a Jim Collins fan, and as we move forward. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And so I think that'll be important pieces to put in place as we move forward, and you'll see some consistency and some continuity, and you'll start to see the police department kind of look and feel not necessarily different, but there'll just be a different presence about them as we start putting those right people into place. So I'm really excited about those. Those are sometimes the most important positions and decisions you can make, is about your leadership. And I will tell the commission that, to give you kind of a window into my decision making, I'm less concerned about the administrative aspects of the job they do, because I can teach people how to do certain things. I'm more interested about the heart of the individual and their leadership and their ability to lead people, and their ability to be in relationship with each other and make good decisions. And so we'll make good decisions about who those people are going to be within the police department. We have embarked on a very ambitious recruiting schedule and recruitment timeline for police officers. We have cut that down from 180 days to 90 days. And we opened the process continuously for police officers for the first time in eons, until we found out that we got 60 applicants in 8 days, which is good news. So the good news is we got a ton of applicants in 8 days. The bad news is if I leave it continuously open now, we're going to be overwhelmed. So we've had to kind of back away from that strategy, but it's good news. But we are on pace to, if things go well, we are on pace to have hired 21 new officers this year, which is a record for the police department.
Jeez.
And I am on pace to at least be able to come to council on the 24th. This is my hope, to come to council 24th and be able to report to council that we're fully staffed for the first time in the history of the department. Having said that, I don't know what departures we're going to have. And again, those just being fully staffed doesn't mean they're fully operational. And I'm expecting 12 to 14 vacancies in 2019. So it won't take long before we're not fully staffed again. But I'm really hoping that as we try to identify gaps and we come with some creative solutions on how we move the system forward, that it's important for me to come to city leadership and say we're doing everything we can to fill our existing FTE. And so we're working really hard, both here and at dispatch. If it's successful here with the accelerated timeline, then we're going to duplicate that in dispatch. And I can't emphasize enough that this is an accelerated timeline for the recruitment and the onboarding, but not accelerating their training. We're not going to step away from training. The cornerstone of any really good police department is good supervision and good training. And so we're not going to acquiesce on that. It's going to be more about trimming the fat of our process, getting people on board. So with that, I will go ahead and be quiet for a little while and see if maybe there's a couple questions that you may have that I'm happy to answer for you.
Okay, I have Joel and Q. Go ahead, Joel.
Do you have a process that you go through for recruitment? I guess my specific question is, are you engaging in targeted recruitment? Oregon's changing pretty significantly in the last couple of years. Eugene certainly has changed a lot since I was a boy. But I guess I'm just wondering if you are bringing any sort of new recruiting strategies to reflect the changing demographic.
Yeah, I've been really, really pleased in the early stages of evaluation. I've been really, really pleased with how comprehensive the recruiting strategies are here. The amount of groups that we reach out to showing interest in trying to garner police officers is very comprehensive. I mean, it's a laundry list of individuals and groups and mediums that we use to be able to do that. I will tell you, though, that even with technology these days, and I know that most of our candidates are very tech savvy, every time we do an evaluation and every time we go to conferences and talk about the recruitment and retention of our good people, is that the number one recruiting technique for every police department is word of mouth. It is about an emotional connection between a candidate and a police department, and usually that starts with somebody they know and trust saying, you should come work for us. And so the key for me in trying to do some targeted recruitment and certain demographics that we're trying to accomplish, especially as we look at our affirmative action goals that we have for our police department, we have some areas of improvement, is to find those folks that are in that are current employees in that demographic, and they reach out to other people and say, this is the place you want to be. We want to be the employer of choice. And so when you have somebody that you're close to, that you've aligned yourself with, that comes to you and say you should think about coming to work for us, that has been more successful than anything I've ever seen. And so we build recruiting teams that try to be reflective of trying to target those demographics. And so I continue through my entire career to be underwhelmed and dissatisfied with the depth of my applicant pool when it comes to demographics, but that's 28 years of frustration and trying to figure out how to fix this problem. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying hard to try and do that.
Do you think your recruitment teams have the necessary tools to do the job that you would like for them to do?
I'd like to believe that we have, and part of some of the one-time monies that we've used each year, we've thrown at recruitment and those kinds of things. So when we talk about the budget committee and council giving me X amount of one-time dollars, it's we try to be holistic and recognize that some of that needs to go to recruitment.
Thank you.
You bet, Joel.
Will, did you?
Quick question.
Sure.
Here comes the country fair.
Yeah.
Starting tomorrow. I talked with a man who's a manager of one of the big box stores. He says that shoplifting just skyrockets during the country fair and after the country fair. I wonder if there are other elements of crime that go up during the country fair, and whether the police department has to do anything to sort of prepare for this event.
So, being my first country fair cycle, it would be, I will have to say anecdotally, being in other environments where we have signature events like this come and go, that the answer anecdotally is yes, that we see increase in those. Our ability to respond to those or to be prepared for those is somewhat limited. And I think when it comes to, it was interesting when we were talking about bike theft. It occurred to me when I was thinking about this, the bad news is we're talking about pervasive issue of bike theft. The good news is we're talking about a pervasive issue of bike theft. When there's other communities our size that are talking about significant gangs, significant narcotics, significant gun violence, but that doesn't mean we don't pay attention to that stuff. So the answer kind of is yes, but I can't give you any stories, and maybe Kyle has more historical perspective because he's been around a little longer than I have.
I'm not aware of us taking any specific steps ever to specifically respond to it. We always know that we get an influx downtown. There's always, we kind of brace for it personally, that it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. But being that it's out of town, we have nothing to do with the event itself.
Heavier load on the sheriff, I suppose.
Yeah. And so we're mentally prepared for it. I'm not aware of us ever having upstaffed or done anything in particular to specifically try to respond better to whatever crime elements. It's mostly lower level issues and behavior issues and thefts and whatnot that are what we deal with.
Thank you.
I put myself in the queue, then I have Sean. Chief, have you ever thought about instituting a reserve program here at the department? Do you have one where you were prior to this?
I think we used to have reserves here at one point.
That's
my understanding, and I've been a part of agencies that have been a strong reserve program and some that are not so strong. The administration of those and the upkeep of their training through DPSST here and CJTC up in Washington is always a challenge because they're volunteers. You try to mandate the number of hours a month that they should volunteer, but on top of that, trying to keep their training up. So I don't know, do you have any perspective, Kyle, on why we went away from the reserve program, or do you have any?
I think it was fairly political at the time, and it was long before I left or before I got hired here. And I couldn't tell you exactly what all went in behind it. I know that there was some discussion around cadets or reserves at the time, and the cadet program was saved. and the reserve program went away, and I don't know all the reasons behind it.
So I'm not sure I can get you all the specifics of that.
No, and I don't know, I just asked that question because when you talk to the older officers here, or experienced officers, I guess is how I should refer to them nowadays, is most of them were reserves here. And so it's interesting.
I was a reserve when I started
Yeah,
in
that we-
Monmouth when I was going to school. So I think there's some real advantages. I think as we've become a more litigious society, there's some liability that is attached to that because they don't have the amount of training that regular officers do, but yet you're asking them to oftentimes function in place of that. And then I also think there's some labor implications of that when you're identifying reserve officers doing duties or supplanting duties of regular staff, that there are some labor discussions that happen to go on with that with regards to the type of work they're doing. So I think we're probably...
We have had a pretty fantastic cadet program for many years. It's ebbed and flowed with the amount of effort that's been put into it. We have a lot of officers here who were cadets here. A lot, and a lot of really, really good cops that got picked up. And quite a few people that could have potentially gotten hired and didn't because they disproved themselves through the cadet process. It probably saved us some trouble over the years. I was a part of our cadet program for almost 5 years before I got hired. And I would say it directly influenced my ability to get hired as young as I did, having that experience. And so that is one way that I've always thought would be nice to pump a little more energy into. Because it's a great way to try out, test out, influence, mold younger folks who are coming up and interested in the career.
On both ends, them and DPD.
Good. Thank you. Sean?
After Joel's question at the last meeting about the recruitment and targeting folks, I reached out to Jeremy my day job is in advertising, so I know we've got a new Sergeant Pope, who's sort of looking at that kind of targeting as well, and just offered my expertise in that regard. And then the question I had was, you said we'd be cutting the fat, to move that from 180 days to 90 days. I was wondering what that fat is.
Generally speaking, the majority of it was the amount of time between the processes that were occurring. So applications open for a month, and then we wait 2 weeks before we call the candidate to schedule. I mean, so most of it was administrative time. The other piece of this is this notion that a police department, that when we're talking about hiring people, that it's a secondary function. It's a secondary function to the day-to-day operations, and that we have to fit hiring in when it's convenient for us. And what I've shifted is, no, we need to make hiring a priority, and you need to be more nimble and flexible and available. And so standing up interview panels at moment's notice when we, for instance, get 2 or 3 laterals that have chosen to choose us as an applicant, being able to immediately stand up a panel and interview those officers, because you can bet that they're in a process somewhere else. We want to be, and I've used this terminology, we want to be the first dog to the bowl, and we want to be the employer of choice. And the only way you do that is if you create a unique brand experience for people that make them almost immediately want to choose you because of how they were treated in the hiring process. Sitting and hearing nothing for a month is not the type of unique brand experience that we're trying to create here. But having you apply, recognize you as a good candidate, and then hearing from you and assigning an officer to you that shepherds you through the process, sending you some swag, almost immediately gets an alignment. And so when you'll appreciate this, when you talk about brand loyalty in people and why people continue to buy either Nike sneakers or Adidas sneakers, that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
A new Google over here.
What's that?
We're gonna be the new Google.
Yeah, we want to be the new Google.
Yeah,
Vodka cocktails in the corner.
Yeah, we got margarita machines in my office.
A few of the things that we implemented a couple of years ago, I temporarily supervised the recruitment team 2 years ago for 9 months, 10 months. And for lateral recruits, we condensed all of the testing into one weekend so that they only had to come to Eugene for one weekend, get everything out of the way. And then we assigned them a recruitment officer after they're interviewed, took them on a one-on-one tour of the building, drove them around to some of the other facilities, put together a book of information about Eugene and restaurants and things to do, and then had swag kits for all of them, pint glasses and pens and stuff, kind of more useful type stuff, golf balls, and sent them off with a little bag of stuff that keeps reminding them. So we've been on this path of trying to make that slowly and moving forward in that direction.
Did you learn all this from
Right.
from the football coaches at U of O? That's what they do.
Yeah, no, so Phil flies our candidates in on the Nike jet.
That's great.
Well, I was going to say that Adidas.
I know, I had to be fair about this. I will
Wherefore
tell
this
you, I will share
Adidas?
a quick story just because I need you to know who I am. I'm in a conversation today about a partnership with U of O, and we were talking about the football season and how it aligned with the games. And I found myself saying "we" when it came to the football season. We are playing the Huskies on the 12th of October.
All right.
And I caught myself, and I'm like, oh no, please don't.
It's all those hats in your office.
I know, you should see my office. It's every week I have some new piece of green and gold U of O memorabilia show up in my office, oftentimes with my face superimposed on it. And so I'm saving it all to see what a year's worth of stuff is in my office, so they're having fun with it.
I'm sure you have me beat. I got invited to give the commencement speech for my department, sociology department, a couple weekends ago.
Oh, nice.
They gave me like so much U of O swag.
Oh,
I
I
don't know what
know.
to do with it.
They've got it figured out, don't they? We don't have 27 variations of the uniform yet, so we're not gonna keep up with the football team.
I have Clara then Steve.
So I was wondering if you are going to continue the Eugene Chief of Police's service on the Law Enforcement Contacts Committee, the statewide.
Yes.
He says with a big sigh.
Painful, yes. but-
No, it wasn't a painful yes, because other than the fact that I know we've had this conversation about the importance of that, but I'm trying to be able to, in my memory brain, grab something meaningful about having moved that direction,
That's okay.
and I can't.
Just the fact that you're willing to
Yeah,
serve,
yeah.
and since I think we're still the only local police jurisdiction that's collecting data, stops data.
Collecting it correctly and reporting it, which is the key here. Because I'm a big data guy here, but I've been down this path multiple times, and I'll be honest with you, it's garbage in, garbage out. And it's how you collect it is the important thing. And from an integrity piece, being able to say we're collecting the right data for the right reasons and fully reporting our data. So if you went and looked at the statewide reports, we look like we have a huge problem. And it's less about us having a problem and more about people under-reporting, in my opinion. And I can be critical of my peers on that because they, you know, I've seen this. I've seen unfortunately my peers monkey with the data before to make it look better than it is. But I am proud of this organization in the sense that we're collecting it. We have a high percentage of collection rate, and we are leading the way when it comes to reporting on time to the state.
So at some point, I would love if this body could get an update on
Sure.
on that work and where it's at, and if there's any data analysis yet to be done, if there's enough data. And then just to give you some thoughts on, at least from my perspective as a commissioner here, what I think might be of value to hear from you in your chief's report is updates on initiatives that you've identified, you know, some of the initiatives you've identified at council and here, and just keeping this body updated on those as there are things to share. If there are particular community concerns that are either getting press or city councilors are hearing a lot about them, or this commission, you know, having your perspective on those as part of your chief's report. Trends, in terms of the data that we've been presented before as a commission, some of it I found more useful than other pieces. So And some of it's more timely at some points of time than others, right? So it's not necessarily, in my mind, that it has to be every month you show us X, Y, and Z. So, for example, Director James's, kind of wake-up call about, our deficiencies or gaps was very timely, very important. I'm assuming at some point you will come back and give us an update on we're fully staffed, we're now deployed, and here's what we're seeing in terms of those numbers. Chief Kearns would show us spot crime maps, and for me personally, I didn't find those super helpful. They were kind of interesting, but because we weren't really as a body grappling with the information over time, I didn't feel necessarily like those particular pieces of data were connected to the work of this commission in a strong way. And these are just my personal opinions. But one thing Chief Kearns would touch on, but sometimes not as deeply as I might have wanted him to, was his community engagement efforts. So, for example, you recently had a meet and greet.
I did, MEAT.
Yes. And so hearing a little bit about any of those things that you've done and what your experience was, particularly in this first couple of years as our new chief, just hearing about your experiences and what what you're learning with those kinds of community outreaches, what kind of events you've gone to, and that kind of thing.
That's great direction for me, and I appreciate that. In the way of instant gratification, I will tell you two things. Most recently, the Killerburger meet and greet felt like was widely successful. It's interesting to me that the challenge that we have is, in one moment I'm having a conversation with advocates around the enforcement of trespass and illegal camping, and wanting to completely move away from that and allow people to sleep wherever they want, because sleep deprivation is a form of torture. And in the very 30 seconds later, I'm having a conversation with somebody that's asking me to load everybody up and move them out of downtown. It is a polarizing subject right now, many of which believe the police department has the answer. And so navigating that is very difficult. But it was a great community engagement, and I included all my command staff and other officers, because it's not just about getting to know me, it's about getting to know this police department. I think that was very, very good. I also met with the Whitaker neighborhood recently and had some great dialogue with them, did a walking tour with them, saw some of the things that they're struggling with, and having the conversation. I was very direct with them about what
That's my neighborhood.
able to and not able to do that. Thea and I had great conversation.
Great.
And so I'm trying to work closely with them with some of the challenges that they're seeing there. And so that was a good introduction to that. And there's a bunch of stuff on my calendar. I'm going to the ice cream social in your neighborhood coming up. I'm going to bring Carrie and the kids. I believe it's on the 29th of this month, somewhere around there, I think.
Yeah, that was in August, but
maybe it is. Anyway, I'm going to bring Carrie and the kids, and we're gonna do some of that stuff. So yeah.
How old are your kids?
Jackson is 10, going to be 11 in August, and Kendall, she is 8, going to be 9 in September. Mm-hmm. So that's a piece of me that has been not intentional, but very has been a tremendous advantage for me to be raising a family while I'm doing this, is I have a tendency to connect with a lot of my staff that are also struggling with how you work and raise a family at the same time. So I am very sensitive to those issues. So it's fun.
I have Steve, Sean, and I'll have you.
I'm over my time, by the way, Bill.
I know you are. But sometimes it's good to have you.
Yeah. So shifting slightly from the chief's report to something that might be helpful, and at the risk of becoming known as a metric guy, we had some discussion last month that I think is really good to follow up on, and that's about identifying some of these policies that we come into most contact with. And I think it would be great to identify those policies, and maybe in concert with the auditor's office and the chain of staff, the chain of command, identify kind of those policies that come up most often, because then we can prioritize what might be, the rise to the top in terms of view by this commission or staff. I think now it's kind of more at random or ad hoc, and maybe there's maturity dates that come back for view, but since we can only do so much in a work year, that if there's a way to bring some analytics to what we should focus on, it would be most helpful for everyone. And I thought that was a really great conversation. I just didn't want to lose that.
My comment was actually in a similar vein. I realized my last one didn't address your question at all. So from the chief's report, I absolutely love statistics. I don't know what it was like before. I don't think there's a need to bog us down with, statistics about everything. So, just a couple about what's going well and a couple where we can improve would be really helpful for me, not just here looking at the policy, but going back to the community and saying, like, yeah, we know these things are going well. We know these things, we've got our eyes on these ones. So that's what I'd like to see.
Okay.
Will?
Just feedback about what we want to get from you. I really enjoyed Chief Kern's presentations, but I felt like we didn't need that same information every month. But once was great. I felt like I learned quite a bit from it, and it was useful to me. But every 6 months or even every year for that kind of review would seem to me adequate.
So did the commission get an annual report time at all? And maybe that's speaking to that issue. Maybe much like what we would do with council. I don't know if the commission has the same kind of exposure to kind of a year in review or an annual report on successes, where areas for improvement, challenges, some of the trending we're seeing, those types of things. That might be really valuable for the commission to see.
We haven't in the past, Chief. We haven't had an annual review from the department about what happened.
But given that, I really like the informality of having you talk and then having an opportunity for us to ask questions. I think that's terrific.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else? Joel?
I'd also say too, this, we don't live and breathe this every day the way you and your staff do. And so a lot of ways, it's great to have an outside perspective to help out in terms of the policy. So I would also say that I think personally I would be really interested in hearing what you think we should hear, right? If there are some particular issues that are coming up within your ranks, or you yourself are having a difficult time and trying to figure out, I'd like to think that you could come to us and seek some guidance or support, or at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We all, I think, from time to time are victims of being so close to the issue that you don't see certain things. And so having a place that I can bring, certain pieces of information just to get that perspective would be really helpful. So I appreciate that.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief. So we'll move on to the restorative rest policy review. Back to you, Sergeant.
Yeah, and just a quick comment from what Steve said. I'll be curious. I'll get on and watch the video from the last meeting, talk about the discussion about picking what policies or what's reviewed and whatnot. It's been interesting for me to see kind of that process of the police commission coming up with their own agenda for what's of interest to them, whoever's on it at that given time, as well as us trying to feed stuff in that we want feedback on, or things that we think would be of interest. And we definitely have gone through cycles of a random smattering of random stuff, and cycles of things that have been higher level. And so I'll be curious to see what that conversation looked like. I contemplated just calling in and listening to the whole meeting last month, but that didn't seem not as easy either. So, but knowing that was part of that, I'll get on and watch the video and see what I can do to try to respond to that. And I'm always certainly trying to find ways that we can make sure that your time isn't wasted or doesn't seem like you're looking at stuff that doesn't matter. So restorative rest. So I kind of talked about this, must be 2 months ago now. I have had the fortunate and unfortunate pleasure of spending about 4 years of my time here working nights, in total broken up in different chunks. Most of it voluntary, some of it not. And I'm one of those people that if I could have done less time on nights, I would have chosen to do less, because I am a train wreck on nights. I don't sleep well during the day. Getting through a night is pretty miserable for me. And as a supervisor, I recognize that. And one of the first conversations I had with my patrol team, on my graveyard patrol team, it's been a long time now, 5 years ago. One of the conversations was, I don't want you just going out and taking a nap on your own in the dark somewhere in an alley or behind a city facility or something. If you're tired, come to me and let's do it safely. Because I get that it's against policy, but let's be realistic here. I mean, you don't always get to sleep 8 hours at night, and being safe is far more important than following every policy. So, as I receive policy emails and updates and stuff, I came across this Force Science article that talked about Henderson, Nevada instituting a restorative rest policy, and it just was like, well, duh. Like, why wouldn't we? It totally made sense. But it's interesting because we have a culture of you don't sleep on duty. That's dereliction of duty. It's against policy. And so it's interesting because I'm met with varying levels of interest here. I've had some people that want to know who doesn't like it so that they can go talk to them. And folks that just think it's silly and that it's unnecessary. Well, I worked 10 years on graveyard, it wasn't a problem for me. Well, the reason you worked 10 years on graveyard is because you slept well during the day. You weren't one of those people that slept 3, 4, 5 hours, and on the 4th day you're a train wreck. So I've just kind of had this soaking in the background as I wrote this probably 2 years ago, kind of got that mixed feedback internally.
And then the new chief showed up.
Yeah, you should ask the chief. I've got a back burner of side projects I've been dumping on him. And so this is one of those that, as we were trying to find things that we thought would be meaningful for the police commission to weigh in on, I think it is something that I think having the public's input on whether or not they're okay with cops taking a nap in the middle of the night is something that the public's okay with. And it would make it a lot easier for me to push it onto the new chief. The police commission says, hey, we like this, which is my hope coming out of this. And it'll be harder for it to not continue to have some traction moving down the road. Because I think it's silly that this isn't just the way it is, personally. So that's kind of the background on it. I included the stuff from Henderson. It's interesting, there aren't very many studies on the law enforcement side, but if you look at sleep studies for naps and effective naps, gobs of studies have been done in nursing.
I was just thinking of it.
My wife is a graveyard nurse, works
Oh, yeah?
12-hour shifts in the ICU at Riverbend.
Oh, does she? I probably know her.
And she was an aide for many years. She's been a nurse for a year now.
Oh, okay.
And I tell you, she is not the same person I married on day 4.
Yeah.
And that person comes back after about 2 days off. So it was interesting to go through and read a bunch of the studies and see where they've done them. And they've been really detailed with the length of the nap, the time of the night, what part of the shift that it was done in. And there's a lot of mixed results. The one thing that I thought was interesting that I didn't include in here, but I wanted to bring up, is some of the recommendations were at the conclusion of a nap that they recommended vigorous 5 to 10 minutes of vigorous activity afterwards to kind of wake yourself up, which would be something interesting to potentially consider, at least noting. So with that, it's fairly short. I think I would be interested in just getting people's gut reactions to the concept first, and then maybe if we have recommendations, thoughts, or concerns going through the policy. But just getting public feedback on what you think about cops taking naps at night.
Okay, I'm gonna start a queue here. I'll start with Claire, then I have Steve, Sean, and then Will.
So in my real job, I am the union rep for the nurses at Riverbend. So I'm your wife's union rep.
I've seen you in some newsletters.
And we've just been having a lot of conversation about 12-hour shifts, not necessarily about night shifts, but I was curious, what is your standard shift length for patrol, because that's who this is really affecting?
10 hours.
A 10-hour shift.
10-hour shift is our existing deployment strategy now. So,
And you have a day, evening, and night shift?
yeah, there's multiple shifts. We're
I've
working
asked you
on
that
There's
this
a lot
before.
of shifts, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But essentially, there's
Yes,
different
okay.
start and stop times to try and account for time of day of week, call volume, so they kind of expand and contract.
And so I'm supportive of pursuing this kind of policy. I completely agree about, particularly on night shift, the need to think about these kinds of strategies to keep people effective and functional, and then able to work, if they're doing 410s, to work all of those 4 shifts equally effectively. And would this be a policy that was specifically for night shift, or would it be a policy for any shift? So that's a question I think the chief would need to ponder.
Well, I have a note here, because I knew that might be something, and that's something that's come up in discussions, and that is that it could be restricted to graveyard hours only. Henderson, after a year, did an audit of the usage of it, and in a year of being open to anyone, they'd had one incident where a supervisor exercised it during the day. I would be less.
Was he exercising it routinely, or just
No,
one time?
one time where a supervisor utilized it. And we have, we have a lot of stuff that happens at night. So we have people that get called out in the middle of the night, supervisors that get called out in the middle of the night. It's not uncommon to get called in at 2 and then just work into the day on 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And so I don't know the circumstances of that, but my guess would be is that there was probably something that influenced that unusual one-time use of their policy. I would prefer, if possible, to keep it more open and then evaluate and then adjust as necessary than to not trust people to be appropriate and judicious with it, and then not be able to see whether or not we can trust people to.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing, and you kind of spoke to it in your introduction, is that, there are going to be times without the policy that graveyard shift workers gonna take a cat nap.
No.
And
I have.
it's gonna be.
I'll admit it.
Be out of compliance with policy and at risk for a corrective action. And, so providing some framework and accountability for how this is provided, I think is a really positive step. So those are my thoughts.
So I have Steve, Sean, Will, Joel, Silver, and myself in the queue. So Steve, you're up.
It's hard for me to add to what Claire and Sergeant Williams just said. I frankly think it's a no-brainer, and I think they want people to be alert and effective when they're up on the wheel. And they have multiple and weird shifts and get called out. We just need to appreciate that it's a different environment. And I think that I like it loose for day shift. And I don't think that we should limit it to a time. I think that we can monitor the program and revisit, and we can coach people that might be abusing it. I think it ought to be broad in that way, but I support 100%.
Thank you. Sean, and then Will.
My gut reaction is 45 minutes enough.
Well, never.
Yeah, especially
at
with
3 a.m., 4 a.m.
Yeah, I would love to see an exercise, a wake-up call, something like that after the allotted nap time. Though people might not like calling it nap time.
That's why it's restorative rest.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the swag will be golf balls and binkies.
I thought you were gonna get M&Ms.
DPD binkies and blankies, and we'll be set.
And then that goes to the other part of it, not restricting it to night shift, is that, you know, police officers in general are not going to be, I feel, the one guy who always has to take a nap in the middle of the day. It's just.
I don't know, it could be me.
It sounds kind of good, doesn't it?
We generally have a culture that is, forgive the redundancy, but self-policing around not being that guy or gal. So yeah.
If it did happen, they'd be sneaking off, slipping into the room so nobody saw.
Yeah.
Good. Will and then Joel.
I'm thoroughly in favor of some policy like this. I think maybe an hour makes more sense to me than 45 minutes. I don't see much potential for abuse of a thing like this, not in the police department. At the university, there could be abuse, but
Professors.
we just have a different attitude. So I guess the main thing I'd say is that I think you should at least consider an hour instead of 45 minutes.
There's some interesting studies about how long is too long, and how long do you become more groggy afterwards.
Do you think that's
and it seems like that 30 to 45 minute window was better, so that you don't slip into a deeper sleep. If you go beyond that 30 to 45 minutes, then you really need to go to like 90 so you can get through a full sleep cycle and then come back out of it. But you're really looking at a cat nap that gives you a quick dose of re-energization. That's a word too, right?
You're just winging that. How much confidence do we have in Kyle at this point? Any of these policies make sense.
It's my creative mind coming out that helps me.
I love your right brain.
I don't even know what I was saying. Something about
You need a
time.
nap.
Yeah.
No, we got signed.
Yeah, right, I need to sign
Science
out.
around the 45 minutes is essential.
Yeah.
And it's convenient because our lunch breaks, officers are given 30 minutes of actual lunch time, and they're afforded a 15-minute travel period before that, which most people just take 45 minutes in general. You show up to wherever you're going. Like I would go home, well, I would get home in 3 minutes, and then I'd be preparing my food, and then have my 30 minutes to actually sit and eat. So the 45 minutes is a natural time also in what so we're not changing the parameters of what our timing is.
That makes sense. Yeah. Right.
Good. I have Joel and then Silver, then myself.
I think this is great. There's some severe long-term consequences of sleep deprivation. Even if you are getting the appropriate sleep during the day, it's been shown to increase the number of heart attacks and cancer. And I remember I watched a documentary a couple of years ago on the QVC jewelry salespeople online. Like a quarter of them were getting cancer because they were staying up night after night after night, you know, and sleeping during the day thinking they were healthy, but they had a huge increase in the amount of cancer growth and just awful stuff. So there's more and more research coming out about this. And certainly when it comes to our law enforcement officers, I would like to think that we'd like to keep them for the long haul. That we want to make sure that they're sharp. Right, so in addition to this, I guess I have a couple just thoughts I'd share out with you all, and maybe you can go back and think about it. One is, you know, what else can be done to amplify this rest period, right? Is whether it be exercise or, you know, cycling and transitioning to and from night shifts. I think being a night shift worker for 5-10 years versus 6 months on, 6 months off probably has varying number of consequences for your long-term health. And I can't imagine we're the only police department in the US or in the world that has grappled with this issue as well. So I'm not sure if you've looked at best practices or other areas in which they've thought about these things, but I would certainly encourage all of us to think about that in the future, because this is not something that's going to go away. We're going to need law enforcement at night, and we're also going to need law enforcement to be sharp until ultimately when they retire, you know, not have to worry about the long-term consequences of having stayed up night after night after night for years. So,
It's quite a physiological yo-yo to go from barely trying to keep your eyes open to being in a life or death situation. And at a super heightened rate of alert after driving Mach 3 somewhere to an armed. I've got one incident that comes to mind that was one of those nights. It was a long, slow, sleepy night, and I wound up, and then 3 minutes later, I'm tackling a guy in the middle of the street to keep him from going back into the house where the kids are at, where he's got a gun, maybe on him. We don't know where the gun's at, and it's just it's quite a mind game.
One of the next iterations, I think, for this, that this commission might contemplate, or maybe we contemplate in our next time we're bargaining a new contract, is the notion of safety release, which we had in Hillsborough when I was there, which articulates the number of consecutive hours you work before you mandatorily have to be sent home. Because what I don't want to do is get into where we're at now, which is we can work you to death, but we'll give you a 45-minute nap. Or we can work you 16 hours straight, 20 hours straight. Think about a graveyard officer who's worked all night and then maybe has a tactical call out the next day and is on point all day in a situation, or in a training situation all day, and then is expected to get a couple hours of sleep and come back to work. So I think there's a combination of two. I think there's some thoughtfulness around not only the restorative rest, but also looking at the number of consecutive hours in a row before an officer needs to just be sent home, and how we craft that in a collective bargaining agreement. But that might be kind of the next iteration, which speaks to kind of what you're talking about, Joel, which is how do we get to a place where you don't need a nap, or at least you don't need a nap because we are inducing it. Now, there's nothing we can do about a graveyard person that works all night, and because of their family circumstance, they have to stay up all day with the kids. We've all been there. I've been there. But there's something we can do as an organization that tries to minimize the amount of time that we expect you to be on duty before we just send you home and say it's unsafe. So.
Silver?
Is there a location for cots, or for the officer to go and physically do this?
Yeah, and in the policy, I specifically spell out an upstairs break room that has some lazy boys in it. So we have a couple of sleeping rooms where there are twin beds, alarm clocks for folks that are like our fifth watch now. It's 5 to 3. 3 a.m. Well, you could have court back at 9 o'clock, so you get off at 3, which means you're really out of uniform by 3:30, and then you only have a few hours. Or graveyard, you're off at 7:30, and then you have to be back at court. So we do have sleeping rooms, but the problem is that you run the risk of getting you conk out, and then we're sending somebody back here to come wake you up when we need you. And so one thing that I liked about Henderson is that they actually don't let you get quite as comfortable in order to reduce that risk. And so we do have a good space that's upstairs and behind a break room, so it's not hard or far for anybody to go to get you if there's an emergency and we're not able to raise you for some reason. The one thing that I'm not sure that room has that I would like to see added is a landline phone that is a second means of turning up volume to be able to call in. So that's one thing that if we are able to move forward, that I'd like to make sure we've got a landline set up in that space or nearby.
And let's be honest, we have certain public safety agencies that get paid to sleep a lot.
All night.
So we could just tone our guys out, much like they get toned
There's a
out.
big alarm that goes off.
I know, the lights come on, tones.
Hey, we could have that too.
Is that it, Silver?
That was it, yeah.
So, I mean, I think this policy is good. What I worry about is how we educate the public, because like anything, the thought of somebody sleeping while we're paying them to be out there protecting us or looking after us.
The firefighters.
So I just think that there's some pieces to this that we need to think about as it's implemented. That is address that, whether that's coming out with it in a press release saying, we're doing this and this is why we're doing this. And I just think that's.
No press release.
You know, there's lots of groups that just want to find anything they can to say that you're not doing your job.
And we also recognize that the acceptance or not of this oftentimes aligns itself with the generation you grew up in. You know, I grew up not sleeping on duty, but I will admit that there was graveyard nights while I was going to college that I had my radio in my chest and just needed the 15 or 20 minutes. But yeah, I agree with you, Bill. I mean, it's not unlike probably the type of outreach or at least communication when we went to years ago in Hillsborough, when we went to the load-bearing vests that looked very tactical, where we articulated this isn't about militarizing police, it's about the ergonomics of getting stuff off around your waist and your lower back and putting it up on your torso so that you could avoid those types of injuries. And I think that's the same kind of conversation we have as we roll out the science around what we're doing. But I do agree with you.
Anybody else? Any other?
I'll say one real quick. I think this is actually a perfect time for this because I think folks are starting to recognize in the medical community that I don't want a doctor who's been up for 12 hours or a nurse who's been up for 12 hours. And I think there's an easy transition to, well, you don't want your police officer in the same situation. And I think there's a climate that generating in our society where this would be more acceptable and people would see it as benefiting them rather than taking something away. So.
And I think the piece too, Jennifer, is that would be important for people to know is that this is managed by the supervisor. This is not, you know, oh, it's my nap time and you've got four guys or gals all taking nap at the same time. This is on a case-by-case basis based on operational availability and authorized by the supervisor. We went to a program in Richland where I actually allowed officers under the same circumstances to work out on duty. For the same reasons. And it ended up being, interestingly enough, it ended up not being utilized as much as they thought they would. But in the instances they could, that we saw huge benefits to productivity and health to be able to grab 45 minutes on the treadmill and just get yourself going.
And just on that note, I mean, this is on their break, right? So whether it's a paid break or an unpaid break, it's break time. So again, it's not just willy-nilly whenever they feel like it, they put their head down. They're on break, they have to check in with the supervisor.
They don't get another lunch break just
And
because they took a nap.
Exactly.
They get to then cram, eat on the
They have
go,
to
or
figure out how to eat
take a
on
15-minute
their-
break
on
and
their- yeah.
chow some food, or in between calls while they're doing reports.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I've also been told by someone who researched some of those studies that it's a 21-minute nap is the one
best.
that gets you into the sleep and out of it without pulling you into full grogginess. So I don't know if it applies to 44 or not.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else? So, is this a policy that you're ready to be done with? I saw you took a lot of notes. Is it something you want to go back and make some adjustments to before you bring it back to us, or is this?
No, I think I'd be interested in seeing, I mean, it's pretty short, the actual policy, and just opening it up to specific policy language, discussion, comments, thoughts, concerns, if we have. I think we've got time for it. Kind of.
I know we're over this a lot of time, so we can make up a little bit. If people have.
And the taser one can partially just be a presentation from me and could be then discussion later, depending on the response as well.
I was thinking that might be what we might want to do anyway, because I think the taser policy probably is going to be a bigger piece to tackle.
Yeah, I'm hoping it will be. So I think if we can get to that decision at least today. And again, this is pretty short and it's pretty procedural in nature.
So does anybody have any particular questions on the wording that they have in the policy, or something that they want to have looked at or changed, or are we comfortable with it?
Seems
Calling it
fine.
nap time.
Denied, Steve.
You want a 21-minute nap?
The nap time policy.
Yeah, we'll sleep on this just a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of thought we might be able to, the actual review here might go rather quickly, so.
So, nobody has any suggestions? I'm open to a motion.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Claire seconds. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. It's all yours.
Fantastic, thank you.
You know how much power you have here, Kyle?
Doesn't apply to your wife.
We're on a roll here. Let me slide you this one later.
I was gonna say, it all goes until the next policy.
Until the taser policy shows up.
Yeah, so tasers. So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that no one was on the police commission. No one here. Were you on that police commission
I
at the
was
time?
not on the police commission. I was the staff member for the ACLU of Oregon who sat in on all of those police commission
I heard those
meetings.
were some interesting meetings.
In the same role that Majeska is in today.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to have your perspective, having sat through that. And I've heard some interesting stories about the back and forths, and it was not quite as collaborative as a relationship.
I was going to say it's not as painful as being shot with a taser, but
Not far
it
off.
was rather painful.
So, sounded like you were going to say something.
No.
So this policy, this was originally written, I couldn't even tell you what year, it's been a long time now. 10 years?
Yeah.
12 years probably?
It's about 10.
So tasers were still pretty new. And we wound up with a very uniquely Eugene policy that's very long and verbose. And really, there's about one page here that's actually useful to officers. And that's the when can you and when can't you, which is a really good page. It's a very well done page. But I see all kinds of stuff that should just flat out be deleted, in my perspective. Where it's just extra language, it's extra explanation, it's qualifiers for the what's there. And so what I would love to see, because I'm on a mission in this policy office to shave as many total pages out of the POM as I can in the short time I have in there. And so I didn't send you a proposed version of it, one, because I didn't have it written, and two, because I didn't want to necessarily feed it to you. I wanted to get honest, open feedback on whether or not you all agree that there is probably 2 pages of garbage that could be removed or rewritten in a way that it's just easier for officers to follow it, and that it follows more of the way our policies are generally written, which is a little bit different than how this is. So again, I think I would be interested in if we can have just some gut reaction thoughts to the policy as it is. If you agree that, and I can even go through some areas that I would make some pretty significant changes as a suggestions for what I'm thinking. And then if you all agree that you think that that we might be on the same page or a similar page, then I will make a draft proposal for a future meeting to then do a legit line-by-line, section-by-section policy review.
I'll start at Q, but I would like to make a suggestion that, first of all, I'll make a quick comment, is that there's some original drafters of this policy that to this day still quote that they wrote the taser policy. Claire probably knows what I'm talking about. But so when you say there's a lot of garbage in it, you should be careful with, because there's some people that are very proud that they think it's the greatest thing ever created. And so, but I thought maybe, because this is, I think, a topic that has a lot of public differences in their opinions on it. So I thought maybe if it's okay with Sergeant Williams, is maybe just kind of go around the table and talk about everybody a little bit about how what the taser policy to them, do they think that we need to have what kind of policy, I guess, that they want to see, because then it will help us kind of design, how much of this do we want to take apart and look at. Am I making, is that clear? Is that so?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that, I think it make it a little bit, kind of give you a little bit of
Yeah.
where the.
Rather than
may
digging
go.
into the specifics of
Right,
Yeah,
and
no,
then
and
everybody
that's
fighting
kinda what I
over all
was-
the, the things like that. And
That's
so-
more what I was getting at in
Okay.
general.
So-
And when I say garbage, it was, for the time, it was useful and it was good the way it was written because it provided the public, eased the concerns and had the both sides of the equation in it. But for where we are now, it just kind of muddies the water, in my opinion, and takes away from the who, what, when, where, how, why, et cetera. So
One of the great litmus tests for this is if you can imagine a police department not having this capability. Are you okay with a police department not having this capability? Whereas 12 years ago we were entertaining, what does it mean to have this capability? Now it's become, we can't imagine not having this less lethal option, which has proven to save lives, and so it's just a different perspective here.
So let's go around, Steve. We can start with you and then we'll go around.
Perfect, Bill. That's actually kind of where I was going to go. I didn't feel like it would be most effective to wordsmith every paragraph in here.
no, and we certainly don't have time for that
I
today.
just want to get some thoughts there. I will just share in my current position, I spent the better part of a year shrinking like 850 pages of policy down to 150.
Yeah.
And I think, especially given the size of the palm, what we expect people to do every day, that this policy is certainly too long and too detailed. We need people to have, they need to be practical, it needs to be concise, it needs to be short, right? We need to understand what I need to do, what's wrong, what happens if I don't do it right. I mean, it needs to be simple and practical. I do think that reporting requirements are something to maybe pause on a little bit, because it seems like this policy, you have to report if you point the taser. But if you have a dog on command that doesn't bite, you don't have to report that, or you point a gun at somebody, you don't necessarily have to report that. So there's some kind of inconsistencies in some of the use of force policies, So this one, you point a taser, you have to report it out. So I think that ought to be looked at as part of this process as well, but
That's
certainly.
one of the sections I've crossed out in my version of it.
Yeah, so I do think it's too complicated, it's too wordy, makes it too difficult to follow easily, and I'd like to see more consistency. So I'd start with, like you say, stuff that doesn't really add substance, cut it out.
Yeah.
I agree with most of it. I think in the analytics we saw of how effective was it to actually fire a taser versus how effective was it to brandish a taser, I like having both those numbers, so I'd go the other way and require reporting on when you have a dog or when you pull your gun. Because I liked being able to see that having the taser as a deterrent was just as effective as actually needing to fire it.
Or more so.
Or more so, yeah. The other part is this taser policy came about after a UO student was tased. I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay.
Policy was out before we were utilizing the equipment.
Because I was approached by a community member when I first got the position who said that she got involved after a UO student was tased, and I think knowing her, she tends to ramble as well. So it doesn't surprise me that there's extra stuff in here. But I think it helped build the trust. So I'd just like an opportunity to invite some of those people who were around before in to make some public comment at some point.
Yeah, everybody's welcome to make public comments, Sean,
Yeah.
before our meeting, so. Okay, Joe?
I've been following the issue of tasers for a number of years now. Certainly, the last 3 or 4 years since we've had increasing conversations nationally about 21st century policing. But certainly before that, my concentrations at the U of O are in crime delinquency and state and corporate crime. And one of the things that I've been particularly interested in recently, and one of the reasons why I was interested in joining the police commission, was to reduce the number of instances in which we need to utilize high levels of force against civilian population. So while this is, I just read through it, very, very long, and certainly I'm sure there's some points where we can sort of trim the fat a little bit. I would hate to see us trim so much that it leaves some room for things that probably were necessary, and I'm sure it took a lot of deliberation to get to. So I would just say that for myself, I would like to see the most stringent restrictions on the use of a taser as possible. And if that means keeping this length, I'm okay with that. If we can cut some stuff while also maintaining the original intent of making sure that tasers are used only when and if and absolutely necessary, that would be my preference.
Yeah, the section of allowable uses and prohibited uses, I don't think I have a single change in.
Great.
So it really is the supporting documentation. The actual authorized use section and the restrictions, you can see even mine has nothing. The whole lead up to it, which is just extra information, I've got crossed out of mine. But yeah, I have no interest in changing when and how the level of care that's provided to folks who've been subjected to a taser, and some of the reporting would all remain status quo.
So in my work with the ACLU on staff there, I did a lot of studies of tasers, read a lot of police reports, saw a lot of video of people being tasered, and I would refer to them as not usually lethal, because sometimes they are. And that was part of the motivation for the strong language. And while I would never take credit for authoring this policy, I do think there are sections in here that I helped write.
Not the garbage stuff.
So if you're looking for someone who gave some critical input, on the original policy, you've got one sitting at the table here. And at the time, just for some context, at the time, just as you said, Chief, we were contemplating a new tool for our police officers, a tool that in many ways was largely untested, and because of a lack of trust between the community, between parts of the community and the police force, a real concern about how this is going to be unleashed on the public. So that informed a lot of what you see in the policy. And I think the other piece in here, as I reflect back on that discussion, was there were many places in here where the chief or the sergeant who was helping us walk through it at the time would say, well, those restrictions are in the use of force policy, or those restrictions that you're trying to capture here are captured in this other policy, or that's a standard of training. But because of the makeup of the police commission at the time and the dynamics in the community, they wanted the language here in this policy. Sure. So, so I don't have a lot of heartburn with what you're saying. It makes total sense to me that there's stuff in here that you're like, well, gosh, over here in the Palm, we address all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear you say that the specifics on when to use, restrictions on use, because those were pretty specific, and really trying to think about those scenarios where, in spite of their best efforts, officers might deploy a taser and end up with a tragic situation. Someone standing in the middle of Amazon Creek, for example. And that has happened. Those were some of the police reports I read from other jurisdictions where people were trying to taser people who were in a river. Or standing up on, a 12-foot ledge. So that's just some background and some context. I do not love the tasers. I still worry about their use, but from my understanding, our police officers are very judicious with their use of tasers. And because of the effectiveness of actually saying, well, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, I'm gonna have to use this taser, people go, okay. That wasn't something that we had really contemplated at the time of their first deployment. So I feel our department has come a long ways since this policy was written, and our community's relationship with the department has come a long way. So certainly, if there are folks who are involved with this drafting who feel they want to come and object, that is perfectly within their rights. But I will look forward to seeing what kind of edits you recommend and work from that.
It was a complicated time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually question now if the officers are judicious with or what was the term you used?
That was it.
With the use of the taser because of the policy and because of the length of it. I mean, I prefer the taser as a less lethal form of getting a person, a suspect, into control. So, but that point has me questioning that. So I feel that a taser is a better option than a firearm. So I'd be interested to see what you would be willing to share with us as to what might not be necessary in there.
I would really, really suggest to you that 80941 authorized use and 80942 restrictions of use are what dictate the judiciousness of our officers and how they apply it.
Yeah.
And I will bet you that 95% of people haven't even read the other 5 pages since it was published, since they went through the initial training. But if you're gonna be writing your police report, you're gonna potentially at times reference the policy to make sure that you cover the basis of the policy, to make sure you articulate what you did. And this is the section that you're gonna go to refresh yourself when you're looking back, or when you are working as a detective or an office guy like me, and then you go hit the street for an afternoon. This is the page you're gonna read to refresh yourself on what are the rules. And this is what's gonna be the meaningful part of it for the line level people that have to apply it.
So, my comments are, anytime we use force, or the officers use force, the policy should be written so they can understand it. It's simple. And I think we spent a lot of time in this commission over the last few years of trying to make policies that are more simple, that the officers can understand and the public can understand it. Because I think, when I read this, I was like, oh my goodness. And so, and I think the policy needs to be written for the officer to understand when they can and can't use it, and the public to understand when an officer can and can't use it. So it needs to be that they can, because when it is complicated like this, I think it does sort of get lost in, that sometimes are they, and they second guess themselves. So that's, because any use of force, I think, needs to be controlled. It needs to have specific when it can and can't be used. And this is one of those instances where I think it needs to be done well, and a long, drawn-out policy like this, I don't think helps. So,
I am not uncomfortable with the idea of revising this policy rather drastically. It doesn't give me heartburn, which I like that one. But from the point of view of people I represent, or hope I represent, an obvious kind of question about it. It's so evident that a taser could be used as punishment. Not legitimately, but maybe under some circumstances, back alley, officers alone, guys being a jerk. So there has to be some way of that having consequences, or that should show in the policy, I think. I think the policy as it's written here with all the verbiage does answer that question if you read it. I think. The taser shows that it's been used, right? And presumably the person it was used on would have something to say about when and how. But, well, let me ask this, have there ever been abuses in the Eugene Police Department of tasers? Where one was kind of used to punish somebody?
Not that I've ever been aware of. I am not aware of any IAs that have ever come from it or where it's been, I mean, I guess it's possible.
It's
but-
possible.
I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of there ever being any documented cases of any kind of abuse other than what's been publicly reviewed and documented and debated.
Our auditor's office wants to make a comment.
I believe one sustained, potentially two sustained taser violations. They were not for using it as a punishment at all.
By anecdote, I have heard of one that I think would, but it's all, I wasn't there, I don't know. But I've heard by rumor of one case.
Well, we've had a couple of controversial cases that have elicited various opinions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Leave it at that.
Controversial.
But, yeah. And I guess it is clear that sort of personal animus and punishment is not a legitimate. I mean, that's clear.
Yeah.
It's just, is there some kind of mechanism or way of ascertaining that really doesn't happen?
Well, that's why we have a robust complaint process and an internal affairs investigative process. And a
I
civilian
just think
review board that then looks to make sure that we've done thorough, complete investigations and that every stone has been uncovered that needs to be and that
Now,
we're being thorough.
I trust that myself.
Yeah.
I'm trying to speak for others, and it's just that it's so obvious that it could be abused in the nature of things.
Yeah, and
that's all I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
sure, and I appreciate that comment. And when I look back over my 28 years of law enforcement, the same conversation was had when the SAP was used, SAP gloves were used, OC spray came out, batons came out, collapsible condoms came out. I mean, we continue to have these conversations because in every iteration of any tool that we have added that is considered less lethal, not less than lethal, but less lethal, because we do know that we have some instances of death in all of those instances. That question comes up about what happens when somebody's not watching, what kind of abuses happen when somebody's not watching. And for me, as the chief, I'm more sensitive to the deployment of the taser for certain non-compliance types of things that we started to see in Portland happening. And for instance, hey, get up on the curb. Explicative to the police officer, no, get up on the curb now. Explicit to the police officer, and the next thing you know, they're being tased for not standing on the curb. This is more of wanting to, and this is why I've moved away in my prior agency, I moved away from the descriptor of being a use of force policy, and the policy was crafted around response to resistance. And so to try and make sure that what we're articulating is our response to resistance, not just an arbitrary use of force. So.
Jennifer?
Well, I think everyone's already said all the important things. But I did have one question. I think earlier tonight you said we don't have taser cams. Is that correct? I'm just curious, did we when they first came out?
We had some. It's been a long time, and there were some purchased, and the video quality was terrible, and they were bulky, and they were not very helpful, and they were expensive. And my vague memory is that due to a variety of all those reasons, we quit buying them. And then we soon had in-car video, and now we have body cams.
So it's useless.
Yeah.
So that's a whole paragraph right there.
I know, right? That's like a half a page.
Right.
Right. Easy.
And I don't have anything useful to say other than that.
I think Steve, you wanted to come back to you.
One other thought. So I assume that you'll kind of check current law with allowable uses, because there may be some uses here that's not allowable under current laws.
Yeah, I'll compare it to the Lexipol, and the Lexipol's up to date.
Okay. Is there, I
And
think maybe
we
it
pay
was
them to.
Bryan versus McPherson. There might be something that's recent worth looking at. But I'm just, just want to make sure
Yeah.
that
We're
it's
still in line.
consistent. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't work for the ACLU anymore, so don't look at me.
Well, it sounds like we've got a resounding response that I have more work to do.
Yes.
I've got work for the next month now. Thank you.
Perfect. Anybody have any other comments on the TASER policy before we move on? Okay. You have your work cut out for you.
Outstanding.
Anybody have any community outreach updates? Any meetings they attended or anything in the last? That reminds me that I should have said when you were talking about what we want from you. And I think I'd mentioned it to you one time when we talked about it, but it's nice to know if there's events that you're going to or you're speaking at that may be good for us to attend. I know I used to attend a lot with Chief Kearns when he'd go to certain groups or there was a certain topic that was that we felt important for us to kind of go and listen to hear what the public was saying. That would be great if you could do that at your updates each month. Okay. With that, we will move to closing comments. Silver, can I start with you and we'll go around the table that way?
Yeah, I would have went to the meet and greet, but I'm a vegan, so maybe if you do it at a vegan place next time.
They have a choice for you there.
Yeah, fries.
It doesn't maybe taste as good.
I was busy. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Actually, it brings up a good point. I was talking to my son about Chief Kearns and some of the new work that he's doing. We saw him somewhere, and he goes, "Oh, that was the guy that we had lunch with when we were introduced to the council." So I look forward to the same thing with you. You know,
Yeah.
having a kind of a rapport and being able to.
It's great.
To meet with you. That's it.
Thank you. Claire?
I'm good, no comments.
Joel? Hey.
Yeah, we'll continue to keep you all in the loop around this SB 22 issue. I know the Human Rights Commission has our quarterly meeting with Mayor Piercy and the city manager.
Mayor Vance.
Finnis. Years.
Old habits die hard.
Years. Next time I'm going to say Tory, excuse me.
I highly doubt that.
We're going to meet soon. I know one of the things we're discussing is this issue. So I'm sure Chief Skinner, not Chief Kearns, will be kept in the loop as well. So.
In going back to the IP 22, I'm really glad that we're taking a stand against it. That's my only comment.
Mine is related to the earlier discussion about the metrics. I just want to be clear, I don't feel like we're wasting our time here. I just feel like time is finite, and if we can use tools to make that more useful and effective for everybody, then we should consider that.
I don't have a comment.
Well,
I liked the killer burger thing that you did. I mean, I wasn't there. But I especially thought it was valuable that it got reported in the media the way it did. It was really a positive looking bit. And if you, I think it'd be great if you could continue to do some things like that.
So those are planned quarterly,
Nice.
is what's going to happen, and they're going to be held around the city. Killer Burger, if you read the media release, I had a unique experience with them during the process,
Yes.
which made me land there first.
Yeah.
And they put the guy at the register who I had the experience with, which was a nice reunion, and we remembered each other, obviously. But it's planned quarterly. It's part of something I believe that is important. There'll be some other outreach stuff that you'll see coming up around the holiday season. We're engaged. We are launching a Shop with a Cop initiative with underprivileged kids. We're working on sponsorships now, and I'm working with the Police Foundation to help sponsor that. So you will see police officers and kids shopping at either Target, Walmart, or Fred Meyer, whoever wants to take advantage of that partnership. And so that's my right brain of my thinking goes down those paths, and so you'll see a lot of that happening. So We'll get the next one scheduled for the next quarter, and it'll be probably somewhere, probably in West Eugene. We'll start there.
Yeah, it's really good. There's programs that have kids that are needy that get back to school clothes or supplies and stuff like that. So that might be an
There is
opportunity.
no shortage of families, and what's really neat about Shop with a Cop that I've been involved with is you provide them with the gift card, you shop with them, and they spend all their time shopping for their families and their siblings. It's not about them. And the other thing that's neat about it is you often see them go over budget, and you see cops come out of pocket to make sure they get everything that they need. It's just a great opportunity to connect with that group. So.
Really.
That's great.
Any other comments, Chief?
No, I'm good. Thank you, sir.
Kyle, anything for you?
Little piece of information, we are at the cusp of doing our re-accreditation process. So the last handful of months, I've been spending a lot of time updating the 105 to 110, somewhere in there, standards that have to have proofs and policies and all kinds of updates to them. So Tuesday, I'm dropping the case off with the Accreditation Alliance president to begin that process. So hopefully within a month or two, we'll have our thumbs up, good to go for another 3 years, and then I'll have time to work on this. It's been very time consuming. I kept the chief busy with his signature.
Yeah.
That's all we got.
Good. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thanks, Bill.
Guys have a good evening.
I worked in the, I was a security officer, and I did graveyard for about a year and a half.
Oh, gosh, this
That was
is long.
Yeah.
Oh,
It started like at 10 o'clock.
All right,
in the
so,
evening.
Alrighty.
is it
O'clock in
your
the morning.
time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. So I had two things, I don't know if.
That's why I love
one person
signature